Alrighty. Happy Wednesday to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at noon in this lunch hour to host some incredible guests and subject matter experts. We're really excited to hear their presentation on urban heat islands, green space, and community connected climate action. We have Jennifer Brady, who is a senior data scientist and researcher with Climate Central. Jennifer leads Climate Central's data-driven investigations into climate trends and impact. Her work on the Climate Matters program includes studies of climate change-related disasters, major power outages, and urban heat island effects across the United States. Super grateful for Jennifer Brady and the Climate Central team for having us today. We want to give a shout out to Dr. Ben Zaitchik. He is the chair of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Hopkins University. He's also the principal investigator for the Baltimore Social Environmental Collaborative. We're super grateful for his continued support of our initiative. And last but not least, we want to introduce Katie. Katie is the executive director of Baltimore Green Space. She's born and raised in Baltimore, and she has 2 decades of experience in nonprofit management. She co-chairs the Baltimore City Tree Ordinance Committee and is a member of the Forest and Cities Network. She's a member of a bunch of other networks. Her network is extensive, her experience is extensive. She's also a member of the host committee for the Greater Baltimore Climate Summit, so we're ever grateful for Katie to share her expertise today. We can go to the next slide. So a little bit about the agenda for today. We're going to just do a quick overview of the Greater Baltimore Climate Summit. We'll give the floor to Jennifer, Ben, and Katie to give their presentation. We'll open it up per usual for questions and answers. You all can raise your hand, come off mute, and ask anything that you would like to ask this panel. If we have time, we'll go into some breakout sessions so you all can connect with one another. And then if we have time again, we'll recap the breakouts and then we'll close. So the summit is a grassroots community organization. Sorry, just letting Karima in from the waiting room. Hard time talking and maneuvering at the same time. But the summit is hosted by a committee of professionals from Morgan State, Baltimore Green Space, the HBC Environmental Justice Tech Collaborative, and a bunch of other local organizations. And it's an innovative gathering inspired by the California Strategic Growth Council, tailored to the unique needs of this region. And our aims are to bring awareness to the most pressing environmental issues in the region, increase organizational capacity to capture funding to the region, and initiate a collective synchronized agenda across a bunch of sectors, organizations, institutions, and agencies. Next slide. Shout out to our amazing host committee. I see some of them on the call today. Thank you, Karima. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dr. Lubear. Thank you, Autrice. Thank you, Katie, for being a host committee member and an expert on the call today. And thank you so much for everyone else who's in attendance. This initiative is a success as a result of all your engagement and participation. As a result of all the work that we've done over the last maybe like 12, 15 months now, we've surveyed over 1,000 people on priority climate issues in the region, which is super incredible. Thank you guys so much for giving us insights. And we do plan on producing a report that would showcase what you guys think is important and what things should be highlighted or what policies should drive solutions that you all have given us insights on. And then we've had over 750 event participants since last November. I'll hand the floor over to Jen. She is an incredible expert on urban heat islands, and I'm going to be taking extensive notes because she's already told me a couple of things that I didn't know.
Well, thank you for inviting me to your climate summit. And I am maybe knowledgeable about urban heat islands, but not as knowledgeable about Baltimore. So my part of the presentation is really going to be an overview of what we're talking about when we talk about urban heat islands. And then Ben and Katie can really fill in the details on what's going on in Baltimore in particular. So the urban heat island effect impact in general is just a measurable increase in the air temperature resulting from buildings and development, the things that make up a city, basically. There's also elevated heat if you put a big subdivision in the middle of a cornfield, that's going to be warmer too. But you're going to have the most concentrated heat in urban centers because of the development and because also we produce a lot of heat ourselves, just being there and living. So one of the interesting things I find, and I think this is because of the urbanization of the globe, is more than half of the global population, about 80% of the US population lives in cities, which means they're all going to be at higher risk. And I'm going to be driving all the slides today, so if there's glitches, you can blame that on me. So I'm learning this as I go along. So the first thing, I just wanted to kind of give, like I said, a really high level overview of what the different factors are that can influence the urban heat island. These temperatures are estimates, it varies on the actual building size and density, for example, and what the road is made of. But this will just give you a sense of the first three things we're showing here: building density and size, energy use, and heat absorbing materials, which just means all those hard surfaces around a city are adding heat to the environment. Building size in a few different ways. They absorb heat through in the walls and the materials, but they also block heat sometimes, and they block, especially at night, they block the dissipation of heat that wants to escape back into the atmosphere and not stay down at the city level. Energy use, I think, is a particularly interesting one when you get to something like air conditioners, because the more we have on our urban heat island, the more air conditioners we need to use, and then that it's kind of cyclical and continues to warm our environment more and more. I always say, when this one, if you've ever been stuck behind a city bus, just the heat that's generated from transportation and waste, things like that. And then, of course, there's heat absorbing materials. The surface is going to be a lot hotter, and it's not only is it hotter at the time that the sun is beating down on it, but it's absorbing that heat, maintaining that heat, and that heat will be re-released later. So it just continues the cycle. Some other things that can reduce the heat, and Katie's really going to tell us about some of these great benefits, are water and plants and parks. And these are the main areas you'll see that can cool an area. And these are some of the main solution areas people usually talk about when they talk about urban heat islands. So why do we care? The biggest probably is a threat to human health. Extreme heat is the deadliest weather-related hazard in the US. We're sitting at a time right now, I know I'm in central Jersey, and we're getting some air and rain today. And we often think of these things like tornadoes and hurricanes, which are so visually dramatic, as being very deadly, but heat is actually the most deadly of all the weather encounters that we have. The other thing is just practical, increased cooling costs. A lot of people are struggling right now to pay their bills. And when it's warmer, you're going to have to turn that air conditioner up. Maybe you're going to have to leave it on overnight before you could open the windows. And these are things people struggle with. And at the same time, they kind of feed into each other, because you don't want to say, oh, turn off your air conditioner, because that could lead to serious consequences with your health. Just to kind of baseline, because this is what I do with most of my time, is, what's happening with temperatures. Here is the annual temperature in Baltimore, which is from 1970. We like to go back about 50 years or so. It's gone up a couple degrees, and this is for the year. And then I'm blocking my thing, the maximum temperature. So these are the highest temperatures of the day, have gone up similarly. So these are two areas where it's impacting directly into the urban heat island. So this is going back to just to kind of reiterate the statistics on the fatalities of heat. And the big bars in the middle are the heat deaths. This is through 2024. Unfortunately, we know there have been some this year already, and they will be coming in. The other thing we know is heat deaths are often undercounted, because when you go to the emergency room, say you have an pre-existing heart condition or pre-existing diabetes or something, maybe the doctor checks that as heart condition. They don't check it as heat related. So from all indications, these heat related fatalities are probably undercounted, even from what they are, and they're very high already. So as an organization that focuses on climate change, people always ask us, why do we care about urban heat islands in particular? Urban heat islands are additional heat. The baseline temperature is going up everywhere. The baseline temperature is going up in the most rural area of the country. The baseline temperature is going up a lot over the oceans. So people often will say, well, it's just because of development. That's why the temperatures are going up. No, the temperatures are not just going up because of development, but what is happening in these developed areas are adding additional heat on top of what we're already dealing with. So when you saw that temperature increase I showed you before, some areas of the city, when Katie and Ben are talking about some of the temperatures, that's on top of what we saw in that other graphic. That the temperatures in Baltimore are usually taken at BWI, so you know that's a little outside the city, not necessarily in the heart of the city. So think about these temperatures and things you're seeing as additional heat on top of the already increasing temperatures. So just to tee up what we're going to see here and some of the positive kind of one thing I do like talking about urban heat islands are their solutions. There's tangible solutions. Talking about climate change, a lot of times people ask me, what can I do? And it's a big question. What can I do? With urban heat islands, we can start to talk about solutions, and we're going to hear some of them here. These are probably some you've heard before. Trees. Everyone gets excited about trees. Green roofs, rooftop gardens, cool roofs, cool pavements. The other thing that's interesting to me about the solutions with urban heat islands is they're multi-level. There's things communities can do, things you could do around your house. You could shade your house, but there's also things like whitewashing roads and sidewalks and making cool pavement that tend to be larger initiatives that are maybe citywide, statewide. So there's many levels of initiatives that can take place to help reduce the urban heat. So I think that is where I stop. Like I said, I just want to kind of provide the framework for what we are going to hear in our next presentations. And I think we're going to Ben next, correct?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Jen. Great overview, and thanks to Kari for organizing and everybody for coming in today. Great to see some familiar faces. So I'm just gonna try to build on what Jen said to review a little bit about what we know about Baltimore. So what you're showing here is maps that our group, my PhD student Bianca Corpuz, developed these. And these are statistically modeled maps of the summertime average daily minimum and daily maximum temperature in the city of Baltimore. And so a couple points on this. First of all, this is a statistical model. Why can we do it? We can do it because for years, a bunch of us have been out there measuring temperature using small eye buttons, little sensors, as well as a whole weather station network that we now have out there. I see Dr. Shamar is on the call right now, and she and then Professor Darren Wall from Johns Hopkins have done a ton of work to get those weather stations out with community partners who host them, as well as some mobile measurements we do by bicycle to fill things in. And so what you see here, is something that's pretty clear, right? Which is the hottest parts of the city are downtown, around the harbor, and also kind of the east part of downtown. It comes out as particularly hot. And I think those of us familiar with Baltimore know why that is, right? These are some areas that have a lot of impermeable surface, not a lot of shade, not a lot of tree cover, canopy. The other point I want to make here is that if you look at these, the nighttime temperature structure is particularly strong. So in both night and day, it's hotter downtown, but really during the hottest part of the day, it evens out a little bit. It's those overnight temperatures that are really concentrated high values in the downtown East Baltimore areas. And from a health perspective, I'll get to this in a minute, that can be really important, especially since a lot of people in our communities don't have access to air conditioning. And so there's going to be a big health impact. And so No, that's good. Yeah, we can go. Thanks, Jen. Let's go on. Great. So what we've done here is trying to put this in the context of who's vulnerable to the heat. And so this is now just, this looks a little different because we're now at census tract scale. So we kind of averaged out that gridded information. And looking at the maximum temperature on the right, but on the left, you're seeing the social vulnerability index from the CDC. One can use different kinds of vulnerability indices. This is basically a composite that's looking at things like socioeconomic data, racial data, language, isolation. And you can see the black butterfly pattern there, which most people in the call are probably familiar with the east and west parts of Baltimore being historically excluded and underinvested neighborhoods. And if you then click one more time, please, Jen, if you overlay these, what you'll see now is a map where we're looking at temperature and vulnerability together. And anything that pops out as red here is a place that has kind of high social vulnerability and also elevated temperature. Showing maximum temperature here, you can do it for minimum as well. It doesn't really matter too much. But again, what you'll see here is that, yeah, we got places around the inner harbor that are very hot, but they're showing brown here because maybe from a social vulnerability perspective, perhaps lower concern, relatively speaking, not to say that there's no vulnerability. But then again, you see East Baltimore in particular, and some parts of kind of downtown, Southwest Baltimore, showing as high vulnerability and high heat. And those are areas where we really want to think about prioritizing mitigation efforts. All right, let's see what the next slide is. Here we go. Oh yeah. So just as a reminder here, so here's our daytime and our nighttime. Okay. And I mentioned earlier that the nighttime is particularly concentrated and can be important for health. And if you go to the next slide, here's my one geeky slide. So sorry folks for throwing graphs at you, but I want to show some details here because it kind of matters. So what did we do? Johns Hopkins has this thing called the Precision Medicine Analytics platform that takes information on every medical encounter that people have with the Johns Hopkins hospital system. And then that's all, we do all the personal identifying information is all protected. It's all behind a bunch of walls so that people's information is safe. What we can do is we can integrate that information with some of our heat monitoring and air quality monitoring data, and then look and see, here we're doing this now at census block group scale and saying, well, okay, does heat contribute to a particular health outcome? In this case, we're looking at asthma. And so on the left-hand side is pediatric asthma, on the right-hand side is adult asthma. Look over the whole record of data, a bunch of years in that record, and said, okay, let's now look and see, are the chances of someone showing up at the hospital with an asthma-related admission higher if there has been an extreme heat event in the past week? Okay, so does heat contribute to elevated asthma risk? And then why do we have all these lines here? It's because, well, what do you call extreme heat? This is something that people like me spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about. Like, when is it a heat wave, really, right? And there are lots of different ways to calculate that. So you see that we've got here about, I don't know, like a dozen on this chart. That's what HI07, I04, 06. I didn't bother defining them because it doesn't really matter. But these are all different ways you can say, oh, maybe it's a heat wave if it's above 95 degrees in the afternoon. Or maybe only if that happens 3 days in a row. Or maybe if the nighttime temperature is above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, has a certain amount of humidity. Or maybe it's because it's one of the hottest days ever experienced in this neighborhood, even if this neighborhood's cooler than others, right? There are all these different things you can do to figure out. And so then we said, okay, for each of these indices, do we see an elevation in asthma? And there's a dotted line there at 1.0, right? And anything to the right of that dotted line, if it doesn't overlap the dotted line, means that there's a significant risk factor associated with heat. All right. And the range is because there's uncertainty because this is tough data. The ones in red use daytime temperatures to define a heat wave. The ones in blue use nighttime temperatures to define a heat wave. Okay, so red is day, blue is night. What you're seeing here is that, with one exception, HI07 is a weird, very extreme index, but the only other indices that matter either for kids or adults are nighttime. Okay. And this really matters, right? And it matters because those maps I was showing, that differential, and I saw someone put in the chat earlier, thanks for doing that, like there's a 10-degree difference between downtown and the outskirts. That's particularly true at night during heat waves, right? And so that's when the really the inequity of heat is felt. That's when it's affecting people's health. And that is also, so that's when it's affecting people's health. So when we need to measure it most effectively, it also tells us what kind of interventions we might need, because a lot of people are inside at night, right? And so maybe that we need to be thinking about indoor temperatures. It can really help us move forward about the best ways to adapt to heat. as Jen indicated, as the temperature in general continue to increase. All right, took a lot of time for that, but I wanted to explain it because I think it matters. Last couple of things I'm just going to say is that to close up about heat wave events. So what I've shown so far is kind of like heat waves in general, but let's get specific about what we all experience. So anyone who was around in the last week of June this year, for example, knows it was hot, it was sticky, it was like one of those June heat waves that really hurts, right? And using this Baltimore Community Weather Network data that, again, Dr. Shamar and Professor Waugh are putting together, each dot here is a weather station hosted by a community partner. And you can see this difference, as we said. So during this heat wave, so morning minimum temperature, this is like just at dawn, right? Which is when you get the biggest heat island often. You can see the difference here, dark red to blue. We're seeing a difference of about 10 degrees Fahrenheit in this gradient. And so if you click one more time, a little box should show up. Yeah. And so what we did, of course, being stupid, is we said, hey, it's crazy hot out there. Let's go get out on some bicycles and see how really hot it is. And so if you go to the next slide, what we did is we went out and we biked around that area where that box was to understand. So we did like a 6 a.m. ride, there was some 3 p.m. rides to figure out these contrasts. And this is where I'm just going to close up and hand it over to Katie, because we're working with them now to do some more bike rides like this to really understand the power of different cooling interventions. And now this bike ride, we kind of rode in a loop. Red is hotter, blue is cooler. And if you know Baltimore, so you see Clifton Park in the middle there, and you see Herring Run. That's that bright blue area, right? And so, not surprisingly, you get in there even at dawn. So this isn't the middle of the day. This is at dawn. It's already a lot cooler in that forested valley, right? And you might also see that up in the north part. It's a little cooler in the south part where you're into Broadway East in those areas of really low tree canopy. Yeah, thanks. There's the question. What's the pattern of tree canopy presence, absence, and temps? Exactly. So in those lower tree canopy areas, we are seeing much hotter conditions. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but I'd love to follow up. The work we're doing right now is to understand really quantitatively how tree canopy and these other factors all it could be integrated to understand the effectiveness of different interventions at different scales, which is one of the things that Katie's all about. So let me pass to the next slide, and I think that's going to be her taking over.
Okay, so as mentioned, I'm the executive director of Baltimore Green Space. I do want to say that Baltimore Green Space is a land trust for community managed open spaces. And so we protect community managed spaces in Baltimore. And we also teach people how to care for forests. What you are seeing, hey, what you are seeing is a map of community managed open spaces in Baltimore City. Next slide. And this is a map of forest patches with core in Baltimore City. Next slide. And this is that together. So you can see how they look together and where they're located. Next slide. But then what we did was we wanted to, as part of our developing a conservation planning tool with support from the Land Trust Alliance, we wanted to look at the intersection of temperature, cooling benefits from green spaces, community access, proximity to vulnerable populations, et cetera. So this is the temperature analysis, and anything in blue is cooler than the rest of the spaces, right? And so these are the community managed open spaces that show significant cooling, enough of a cooling difference to show up. Next slide. And here's a version of that over the landscape, just so you can see some tree canopy behind it. Next slide. And so what we're seeing is that of the spaces that we looked at, 48 are currently providing some clear cooling benefit. And then there's 279 with the opportunity to increase their cooling benefit. Next slide. This, similarly, is the forest map I showed you before. And you will see that there are very few patches that are not providing benefit at all. Next slide. Again, over the canopy, so you can see proximity to other things. Next slide. And this is the number of forest patches that are providing cooling benefit of the ones that we looked at, 728. Of those not providing cooling benefit, when we drill down on them, it's because of the size configuration of the patches, or the surrounded impervious surface. There's just like too much of a ratio compared to their size or configuration for them to have impact. Next slide. So when we look at this together, you can see that the forests are providing a more significant cooling benefit than the other types of uses. Next slide. And this is them together. So if we were to say we should protect all 776 of the spaces providing cooling benefit, we could right now, right? But I don't think that that's a safe policy and advocacy position to take because of the location of all the other spaces and how important they are for many other reasons. Next slide. So one of the things that we're very interested in is understanding when cooling benefit of forests, the different ways forests compare to other canopy types in their benefits. And as part of that, what we need to understand is how the temperature, how the cooling effects affect the surrounding community and how far they radiate out. And then also how that compares to other data, other type of uses, right? So a big green space versus a big forest patch versus a big parking lot, right? And we want to be able to really demonstrate for folks the differences in the benefits that each type of land use provides. Dr. Matt Baker, Mike Alonzo, and Shondas, and there may be a few other people on this paper, already did an analysis of different tree canopy types. I will drop that link in the chat after sharing a few more pieces of information with you. But we wanted to look a little bit more closely at Baltimore specifically. And so our first effort at that project is we are doing a temperature monitoring study around a piece of Chinkapin Run that we refer to as Sycamore Forest, because of the forest steward that takes care of a giant sycamore there and the patch surrounding it. So this weekend, we're taking the bikes. Next slide. On roots radiating out from the patch, the bikes with the temperature monitor, to see how far the cooling benefit extends into the community and where it stops. And then we're going to do this at other places too, but this is our first test run magic ride. And what we're hoping to learn is, where the cooling benefit stops. But the reason we're hoping to learn that is so that we can start to develop some talking points that are more clear about the benefits, or that are even more clear about the benefits of retaining forest in urban areas. Next slide. You're welcome to join the ride. This is a QR code. There's already at least 33 people signed up to ride with us, Ben. So there's way more to say about, I want to say a few other things, actually. Forest patches, the other thing that we looked at is with our forests and cities partners is at what points are forests that are healthy better at cooling than forests that are degraded? And the reasons we've been looking at this is because, you guys, if you're in the city and you live near a forest patch, you know that sometimes there's invasive vine problems. And we were looking for ways to incentivize removal of invasive vines and funding that work, but without data to say that it matters, who's going to fund it, right? And the recent study that NAC did shows that, guess what? Healthy forests are better at cooling and several degrees better at cooling than a degraded forest. Degraded forests themselves are better at cooling than trees over grass. So even degraded forests are better at cooling than trees over grass. Then healthy forests are even better than they are. So that's really exciting. And we're finding similar results for stormwater management. They just released a study about that as well. And I'll drop all the links in the chat. And I think we're fine. Oh, the other thing we're going to do, so you saw the one about radiating out from a patch, but we have a network of forest patches that we work with regularly, and all of this work we do is tied to communities of care around these green spaces. So we're working with the partners at the forest in the Forest Stewardship Network, and we're going to take routes that go past all of their forest patches and be able to tell the stewards how much of a cooling difference the forest provides compared to other spots on the route that go past other green spaces or down roads with no green spaces. And so that should generate a lot of fun data to analyze and have discussions about, and possibly, other route plans. So if you can't ride with us this weekend, you can ride with us another time.
Wow. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Jen, for all that information. I want to ride with you guys, so we'll talk about that some other time. But I do want to open the floor up for questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your Zoom hand, and you can come off of mute when we call you.
Can I ask a question quickly?
What'd you say?
For Katie, I think I was unclear. How do you define a forest? Specifically.
Oh, in this particular analysis, we use the forest. So how we define forests ourselves, forest patches, is kind of any patch, any place with layers, like tree canopy with layers, that is 10,000 square feet or more. This is because of the legal definitions in Baltimore and Maryland. That's why we started there. As far as the patches that are in the analysis, what was included there is forests with interior pixel or core. And so it's a forest of a certain size, where there's a distance from the edge to the interior of about 40 meters.
Awesome. Altrice?
Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for their presentations. And I think it was Dr. Z that talked about asthma and heat with children and kids. I'm just wondering if they had any resources that I could link on or know about, as I do some parent groups, and I just would like to share that information just so they could have it for knowledge and how they can help their children.
Great, thanks for the question. So the stuff that I just showed, we're still vetting, so those actual results. But let me take a quick look at our partners in the Breathe Center that do a lot of this work on outreach. I'll take a quick look at their site right now and see if I can point you to some things.
Thanks so much.
Yep, school is fast approaching. I think it's coming up really, really soon. So
Teachers are back. I'm sorry to cut you off, Carrie. Teachers are back. So school is actually here.
oh wow. Does anybody else feel like the summer just like came and went so fast? So we have a question in the chat. Let me scroll back up. Ashley asked, how many writers are needed?
I'm not sure what their original goal was, but we've already exceeded it. But you're welcome to still come out and be a companion writer. But Ashley, I can get you the baseline numbers later if you wanted to just know what the model was.
Cool. We have a question in the chat. Is there any data on the effects of street trees?
So there is, and it's in the paper that I dropped in the chat, the one that I just dropped. So and it looks at the difference what different benefits different tree canopy types provide at different times of day. And street trees do some work, but trees over grass and tree forests are better at cooling.
Yeah, and if I could just build on that's 100% true. And there's also this challenge of like what we're trying to manage for. And so a set of street trees is not going to cool the air temperature as much as a forest patch. That said, street trees are providing shade on building facades, at bus stops, along the corridor, right? And so when we talk about how we value trees and what we really mean by heat, we sometimes mean different things. Katie and I are spending a lot of time trying to quantify this air temperature metric. But would you rather be in 90-degree heat in the sun or 90-degree heat in the shade, right? And so these are all those kinds of different exposures. And if you start looking at things like radiant heat or this thing we call the Welt bulb globe temperature, which tries to measure your thermal comfort environment, those street trees are hugely important, even if they aren't, cooling the air as much as a forest would. So that's one thing we want to be really careful about, because sometimes our results show like, oh, the street trees are out there and their temperature's not that much cooler. But we don't want to mistakenly imply that means that the street trees aren't keeping people cool. They are. They just aren't cooling the air temperature as much.
Yeah, and I guess something I wanna add, like all tree canopy, we want all the trees. The reason I drill down so hard on forest patches is because there's not a lot of advocacy about preventing their loss. And when they do provide such a impactful cooling benefit for the overall temperature gains, that's really problematic in a climate change framework.
Patricia?
Hi, I have a question for the group, but it might be mostly directed at Jen. I was wondering with regards to urban heat island, how should you treat your roofs? What's the best approach? If you had to choose between solar panels and a green roof, where do you go?
I am not going to make a call on that. I definitely do not have the engineering expertise to wade into that. Unfortunately, I don't know if anyone else on the team here does, but yeah, I think that there's also a lot of kind of probably pros and cons you need to weigh in a lot of different ways when you're talking about something like that. So yeah, I don't have the engineering chops to give you that one, unfortunately, Patricia.
Just speaking to briefly from the Baltimore perspective, right? So there's a lot of good emphasis on cool roofs, including like city council bills and stuff on just getting white roofs, brighter roofs on. And it just makes a tremendous amount of sense for the Baltimore row home, right? Because what you care about is the temperature in those upstairs bedrooms. It's no more expensive to put on a cool roof than a standard asphalt roof. And so yeah, if you're replacing early, then you can think about opportunity cost, but it doesn't really cost anything, right? And so there's just a huge value to it. Green roofs on row homes are absolutely feasible. There are good people looking at that, and like structurally, it's an option. It tends to be obviously a little bit higher cost, a little higher maintenance, and so it's not going to be for everybody.
And I just saw a kind of a related comment in the chat about, building, and there's an overall possibly shift in building, not just with roofs, with building materials. You hear a lot when you talk about urban heat that especially the northern part of the country, we built our homes, we built our buildings to stay warmer, not to stay cooler. That was really the aim. And so, if you go to Phoenix, there's going to be different building designs because they're building for different climates. And so there's going to need to be an overall shift in not just the reflectivity of the roof, but maybe the materials, because everything is absorbing heat. And so it's probably going to be part of a bigger effort on, how do we just build for heat in the future? And there's probably going to be a lot of questions, do you put windows facing certain ways so you're not getting as much direct light, things like that. There's definitely a lot of challenges as we shift our thinking to a hot world instead of we need to keep warmer world.
Thank you. We have a question from Ashley in the chat. How do trees affect humidity?
Yeah, so this is a really good one. Because when we say, well, how do trees cool? One of the main ways they cool is by transpiring water, right? And that puts humidity to the air. And it is absolutely true in quantitative terms that if you have a bunch of trees accessing subsurface moisture and putting to the air, you have higher humidity. And therefore, if you're thinking about your heat index, there's a bit of a penalty there, right? That like maybe you're cooling the environment, but you're adding humidity to it. What we found though in Baltimore is that aside from like the really big forest patches, like the large parks, if you look around these areas, maybe not inside them, but just like where people are living around them, the humidity effects are relatively modest. That's what we found so far. And so that if you talk about humidity gradients in Baltimore, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're on the water, right? Or again, as you get into maybe some of the really big forests. But on the whole, the cooling effects like of trees lowering temperature and not to be a broken record, but providing shade, right? Like those kind of benefits really reduce heat exposure even as humidity goes up. And we're interested in this because there have been studies that have been out there that said like, hey, cities actually aren't that much hotter than the surrounding because yeah, there's an urban heat island, but there's also an urban dry island. And so therefore the heat index isn't that much higher. And those studies, I know good friends did them, good studies, but I don't know how relevant they are to lived experience, quite frankly, because I think getting trees into these environments, even if it makes it a little bit more humid, on the balance, it's reducing heat exposure in so many other ways that it definitely outweighs any humidity effects.
Thank you. Katie, did you have something you wanted to add? Okay. Mark mentioned in the chat, any thoughts about planting trees in community gardens?
And yeah, I mean, planting trees in community gardens is good. Like when we look at when I showed you the map of the community managed open spaces, when we looked at the spaces that were reddest, there was no tree canopy at the spaces. And the places that had cooling benefit were either large, clustered with other green spaces, or had trees present. And so we're back to trees equals good for cooling. And you would just want to be careful about how you're planting for the goals of your green space, because if you're trying to grow food, you want the sun access for your food garden. There's lots of food does need more direct sunlight.
Cool. Dave says there are still a lot of new construction in my area putting on black roofs. What can we do to educate people on that?
So there is some of this is addressed in the climate, I believe is addressed in the climate action plan as a goal to like make it so that new buildings must have this, but it's something we should double check. If I'm not positive, it's been a minute since I read it. So it would be like looking into how they're implementing that is one way. Another way is there is a program that's running through Civic Works that I think is working on this issue. I also think the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative is working on this issue as well. And even I think the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, I think both of them provide incentives for people installing them. So
Yeah.
with them.
No, those are great resources. I also, a few minutes ago, I put into the chat the Smart Surfaces Coalition study. If you're just looking for information, I'm going to pop in now the link to the City Council legislation on this. Because I also don't remember off the top of my head what the incentive structures are, but that, there has been action. It could be even more ambitious, but it's already a really good start. As you say, like how do we get other people to know about it? And certainly, this city council legislation faced resistance from the asphalt roof industry, right? But there are lots of other industries and local businesses that are doing cool roofs, and so it's not like there might be winners and losers, but it's not like it's overall an expense.
Thank you. Sean says, are there good resources for green roofs for homes locally? Oh, you just answered that one. So we're good. We're good to go there. I have a question about how you get people excited about planting baby trees and growing them. And, I think the bigger trees don't really require much nurturing and care, but the baby trees do. And so sometimes you see the baby trees getting planted, but then they don't make it to that big tree state. How do we get people excited about taking care of baby trees even after they're already planted?
I can take this one. So I know that Tree Baltimore and the nonprofits in that network, like Tree Trust, Blue Water Baltimore, have been working on this exact issue for a really long time. They're trying a few different approaches. There's been a lot of education as they plant the plants. They sometimes get community members to sign agreements. I think that you know it's about education and excitement and like revving things up. In Philly, they had like an incredible program where you would like, they had a tree matchmaker in order for you to get your tree. And it was like a dating site, but for you and your tree. So I think a gimmick never is always also helpful.
Cool. Think last question before we break out into some breakouts for like 5, 7 minutes or so. Mark Howard says, roofing material companies provide a score for different colors materials for roofing. Are these scores meaningful or just greenwashing?
Yeah, so I took a shot at that in the chat, Mark, and uh, case by case, I suppose, as to what claims people are making. So I'm not going to say that it's all totally true, but it's there've been good studies on this. I mean, if you go for a higher albedo, more reflective roof, as Jen pointed out, or maybe it was Katie, right? Like in the summer, right during the hot season, you're going to get benefit. And so I would be inclined to believe that the roofers are pointing to real studies because they do exist.
Cool, thanks. So we'll do breakouts for 6 or 7 minutes or so, and then we'll come back, maybe share some highlights, and then we'll wrap up. Sound good? Alrighty. Opening the rooms now.
The data. One thing I forgot to mention when I was presenting the data is that Jan Michael Archer, Marina Goldgisser, and Dr. Matthew Baker worked on that analysis with us. So those are my collaborating folks for that project.
Cool. Thank you, thank you. Does anybody want to share anything that they talked about in the breakout session?
Well, I think in our
Howard here.
session, it came up, the glory of trees. We have a few people here today with who are interested in stormwater management and flooding. And so just the kind of dual benefit that comes also from planting trees and forest land to helping with flooding and stormwater management. So another plus point for trees.
I just wanted to mention something that came up in our group is if you want to help with restoring tree canopy, Blue Water Baltimore has a project going on now to provide trees to residents of the Baltimore region, and I think it's minimal to no cost, and they will actually provide some of the resources to do the planting for people who want to have that help. So Blue Water Baltimore is a place for them.
Sharing. Well, we appreciate Jen, Dr. Zaitchik, and Katie. Thank you so much for your knowledge, for all the nitty-gritty details and the science that you shared. I'm sure if someone wants to get in contact you, we can send out your contact information or LinkedIn profiles. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and participating and showing up. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in your respective communities. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.